Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where in the world you are. I'm Alexandra Katehakis, Clinical Director at the Center for Healthy Sex, and today is April 1st, 2019, a beautiful spring day here on the west coast of California. And today's Mirror of Intimacy topic is self-awareness, which I'm really excited to hopefully have a conversation with all of you about. Just a reminder that if you want to talk to anybody at CHS, we do have intake counselors standing by. So I'm excited about this topic of self-awareness. And starting out today with Henry David Thoreau's beautiful quote, which is apropos of a spring day. He says, "It's hard to see oneself as to look backwards without turning around." So it is as hard to see oneself as to look backwards without turning around. And so when you think about looking backwards, you can only turn your neck a certain extent before you can really see what's happening behind you. If you really want to see, you have to turn around. And it's that difficult to see your own self. You can only look so far before you see it or can't find it, or don't know where it is. And one of the things that makes us uniquely human is our cortex, our neocortex. These big brains that we have give us the ability to contemplate, to interpret, to have insight, to think about our own emotions and desires and preferences. And, animals, of course, don't think about those things. They just act instinctively when it comes to their basic senses, whether it has to do with food or sex, or hunting or protecting themselves. But we have a myriad of possibilities because of this big brain that we have. And self-awareness, I think, is really a privilege because many, many people in the world today don't have the luxury of sitting around and thinking about the self because there is war, or they're under siege in some ways, or there's great famine, or an inability to have basic things like water. But for those of us in the Western world who have this privilege and have the capacity for this kind of self-awareness, are almost called upon to make good use of it. And so the fact that you're even on a webinar like this today, that you would be even interested in asking yourself, well, what is self-awareness, or what is myself, should tell you that you are on a path of self-awareness. Otherwise, you would not be interested or have the time for it. And one of the ways to think about self-awareness, first of all, there's no place to really locate the self. The self is this ephemeral thing, but when we don't have it, we know it painfully because it registers in the body. And the self gets developed early in childhood, from infancy on through childhood, by way of the adults that are around us. When an adult is cultivating a sense of self in us, they are interested in us. They're curious about why we used green instead of red paint. They want to know what happened at school today and how we're doing. And all of that cultivates a sense of self because there are literally circuits in the brain down into the body that start to connect with each other, that wire together. And the more robust that wiring, the more integrated we feel and the more solid sense of self we have. And when we don't get that kind of endless validation from our parents when we're very young, that endless sort of seeing and looking and interest in who we are, we're left with a very thin sense of self, a sort of an ephemeral feeling, or wispy, if you will, and for some people just downright empty, that there's nothing there, or I don't know who I am. And that is such a disturbing feeling internally, to feel lost inside. And with that disturbance comes a loss of personal power and an inability to discern and make good choices about what's right for me in my life, whether it's a career path or a lover or a relationship with someone. We don't have our footing or our grounding underneath us without that self-awareness. And over time, through the process of therapy or recovery or whatever path of awareness you're on, we are starting to reclaim the self in a very specific way. We're starting to hopefully give ourselves what we didn't get as children. We become our own best parent, our own best friend, our own best lover. And that is the call when it comes to awakening and having self-awareness. So even on a daily basis, we get these disturbances in the core of our being. And we have to learn how to cultivate and evaluate the deepest origins of these disturbances. So a disturbance might mean that I'm agitated or I'm angry or I just feel like, the world's out to get me, or I can never get anything right, or I don't know how to begin to even start to have a career, let alone get a job. And that can feel so unbelievably helpless. So we want to really start to slow our process down and make a decision to pause in any given moment and really reflect on what is going on besides this impulsivity I might have, or this reactivity I have, or this knee-jerk reaction I have, to start to dive deeply into myself to say, what am I noticing right now? What am I feeling in this body, in this moment? And so even if you take a moment right now as I'm talking and just notice where you're sitting and what's going on in your body. I just noticed as I'm sitting here, I have a slight pain in my left shoulder, which I don't recall having this morning, but maybe it's because of the way I'm sitting. So that's an adjustment I can make and a shift in my body. But more importantly, not to discount physical aches and pains, but when we're locating feelings in our body, we're really locating them in the throat area. And so this is where we stop feelings from coming up from the body. If we notice pain, it's typically in the heart area. And sadness might be in the heart area also. But fear and terror and abandonment can be deep in the belly, really down into the pelvic region. So the lower and deeper in the body the feeling is, or the emotion is, the longer it takes to excavate that. And that's why therapy can be a very long-term process. When it's the higher up it is, the closer to the surface it is, the easier it is to let it out. And letting it out can come in the form of tears or shaking or even anger. But releasing the emotions from the body is part of what helps us reclaim a sense of self. Because if your sense of self was not brought to fruition or abused or damaged in some ways, it can feel like there's a heavy weight sitting in the body, like a weight in the heart down into the belly. So it feels like you're shut down, or people will talk about feeling damaged or lost or broken. And those are all languages really of the right brain and the body speaking about this weightiness, this lack of expression, which typically comes through the mouth, this lack of vitality states. And so what we're wanting to do is to reflect and dive into the pain in order to allow the vitality states to come forward. And this can feel terribly counterintuitive. It's like, who wants to go into pain in order to feel good? But, we've all heard this expression and we've all had the experience of having a good cry. There's something really valid about just having a good cry and letting all of that tension out of the system so you can breathe again, so you can go forward again in your life. So again, if you have any questions as I'm speaking here, feel free to type them into the chat box because that helps to expand the conversation and becomes more of a community conversation and not just my agenda for a conversation. So one of the things that signifies a sense of maturity is this sense of self-awareness. And it plays an integral role in having a healthy love life, and certainly a healthy sex life. Because if you can't share who you are, your insights with your partner, if you can't take responsibility for your anger, your sadness, your upset, your dissatisfaction, without having an honest dialogue, and you're just blindly acting on your impulses, and you're acting out your impulses because you are mercurial or you're shut down, then there's no way for anybody to be in a love relationship with you. They can't do it, because it's like trying to be in a relationship with a wall. There's no feedback coming back and forth. And so it is our journey in this life, if you will, to self-actualize, to become self-aware. And it's only through that awareness that we can attract a lover and attract friends with which we have something to share. So someone writes that her husband's sexual acting out. Well, there's a question to it. It looks like it's a question. Is my husband sexual acting out how he handles emotion? And I would say yes. That's the simplest probably definition of why people act out sexually. It's because, first of all, they don't know what they're feeling. And because they don't know what they're feeling, the only way they know how to get their needs met is through acting out sexually, or with drugs or alcohol or excessive shopping or compulsive overeating or gambling, you name it. Whatever the ism is a symptom of these deeper sense of not knowing who I am and not knowing how to get my needs met. And Mindy says, have you ever seen someone's relationship with their qualifier transform and work if they are healthy, but I'm the one who is unhealthy? Well, that's kind of a tricky thing, because you have to wonder why somebody gets in relationship with someone who's unhealthy. The adage that water seeks its own level is true. No one is healthier than anyone else in a relationship. And we all like to think we're healthier than our partners, but the cosmic joke is that we're not. We pick people who can handle as much intimacy as we can handle. And sometimes one person looks healthier and the other person looks unhealthy, but the quote healthier person kind of likes it that way, because they can only get so close. You can't get close with an unhealthy person. So by definition, that makes you less healthy. So be careful about that. And a relationship can work if both people are willing to work on themselves. If both parties are committed to a path of self-awareness, a path of coming home to oneself, to becoming one's own best friend, one's own best parent, one's own best lover, then yes, any relationship can work, because there really is no perfect person. You want to choose somebody who's compatible enough, where you have things in common, where you have conversations that have meaning to you and that your values are the same. But even with that, you're going to hit a place of gridlock, you're going to hit places of resentments, and that's when the work becomes about you. It's your work. It's not your partner's work. And if your partner's not doing the work, then you can't be in a relationship with that person. So let's be clear about that. Someone says, I need help for healing if date rape from my husband before marriage. Then I would suggest that you go to therapy for that, because there's no way around that sort of violation. That's something that you have to work out in your own therapy, and you and your husband have to work out in couples therapy. And Michelle says, could my husband's sexual constipation, it's an interesting use of that word, be a result of his own lack of self-awareness? And I would say yes. I think many, many people are not able to be sexually free and fluid because they are shut down emotionally, and they're shut down from their own selves. They're not aware of where their own edges are, where their fears are, where their delights are, where their sexual pleasures are, where their kinks are, or their confusions, or their shyness. And all of that is about, again, self-awareness. When we choose a partner, it should not be that we're choosing somebody because we need that person to make us feel well. We need that person to make us happy. We need that person to make ourselves feel sensual or sexual. We're choosing someone because they are additional to what we've already cultivated. It's an addition. It's as if you've set this beautiful spread for a dinner party and people are coming over. And what happens when people come to a dinner party and you've made dinner and set the table and all of that? They bring flowers, they bring chocolate, they bring wine. All of that is additional to what you've already cultivated. It's not like you're saying, I'm having a dinner party, and then you're waiting there and you open the door and there's no food. And you're hoping that somebody brought a salad and somebody brought an entree and somebody's bringing dessert. That's not how it works, because nobody will come to your house for dinner again if that's how you do it. When you are abundant, when you are full and brimming over, then people bring the addition to it. Mindy says, we weren't in a relationship. He would try to hang out, but then see how nutty I was and back away. Well, then, yes, he is healthy for doing that. So I'm not sure what your question is about that, but when he saw that you are not stable, that you are not present in your own self, that you're not cultivating your own self-awareness, then a healthy person will walk away from you. And so it's your responsibility to get healthy, however you determine that is. If you were to get healthy, yes, and if you were to do your own work, then that person would be a viable candidate for you, because that person would see that your actions had changed, not your words, but that you were showing up differently. Someone says, is a constant feeling of anger a release as well? Well, if you're having a constant feeling of something, that is not release. That is a stuckness. That means your nervous system is stuck in a pattern where you're in a high arousal state, you're defended, and you're just angry because there's something underneath the anger that's not getting expressed, which is most likely your vulnerability. So you're probably going to need some sort of guide to help you get through those defenses that have you just walking around angry, because that is not a release. And let's see. I'm just trying to sort of look at all these chats. So let me just get back then to the points here. So I guess what I'm saying is that self-awareness takes a hands-on practice. It means that it's up to you. And there are many ways to cultivate self-awareness. I know for myself, when I was coming out of my own sort of long-term chronic dullness, you could even call it a depression, that I didn't really even know I had until I was faced with tragedy and adversity and I was catapulted into therapy. I was not only in therapy, but I was sitting in Dharma circles, many different kinds of Dharma circles. I would go to shamanic circles. I was studying religious science at one point, Buddhism, really checking out, certainly Hinduism as well, checking out all different types of teachings, yoga. And so I was sampling from many different traditions and interested in what those traditions were pointing to, and they were pointing to the realization of the self. And certainly, and specifically, psychotherapy was the cornerstone of my healing. So I had a therapist I not only trusted but loved. I was going to all these different circles and communities and sanghas with people that were also grappling with this process of self-awareness. So I would encourage you to really find a place, and several places for yourself, where you can start to begin your own self-awareness practices and practices of transformation. And, for example, in today's reading, I talk about Zen Buddhism and how one of the things the Zen Buddhists do is that they have these Zen koans which help to shake up your thinking, that make you think about, what this is. And so, for example, they might take this object with this liquid in it and ask the question of, what is this? And just naming this as a glass of water becomes very reductive, because there's so much more in this universe than just a glass of water. And those sort of things have us kind of shaking things up internally and thinking, in addition to looking at our family of origin messages and the transmission of trauma that we were handed down generationally. And untwining all of that is essential to coming home to oneself. So this is not a one and done proposition. This is something that can take a lifetime to cultivate. But look, you're going to get older every day anyway. And what else do we have to do? But really heal ourselves so we can heal our children and so we can heal the planet. So this is a calling that has more to do with than what you do for a living or how much money you're making or any of that. This is a collective proposition of all of us coming together to heal ourselves so we can stop transmitting trauma to our children and start treating the planet more gently and start thinking about the kind of leaders we want to have globally. Someone writes, I'm happy and satisfied having sex with my husband, but I just got a feeling to have sex with my ex-boyfriend. How can I explain my husband that I'm happy and satisfied with him and there's no problem with him? I cheated on him, so he's not believing me, and he is constantly comparing him with my ex. So the fact that you are still in fantasy about this ex-boyfriend means that there is a third energy in your relationship. And having cheated on your husband means that you really violated and hurt him deeply. You hurt his attachment system, you hurt his sense of self, you wounded his masculinity, and both of you are going to have to work together mightily in order to repair that. But you want to take a look at what's happening, that you're still have this sexual leak, that you still are in fantasy about this other man, and that you continue to wound your relationship. And that is something that only you can fix. And that hopefully if your husband is interested and willing, if he's staying in the relationship with you, certainly he should be willing to go to some sort of couples forum with you so that the two of you can heal this breach in your trust and your intimacy. Amanda writes, a part of my self-awareness is that I am a survivor of sexual abuse and that I have been addicted to pornography since childhood. I want to get some help in overcoming the abuse and addiction in order to learn to have healthy sex with myself without remembering my abuser, or using porn to get excited. What should my first steps be? Well, Amanda, thank you for writing this, because this is so common for women, and my heart really breaks for you. And I hope that you use this gross and horrible wound to grow yourself into a powerful, fierce, sexual human being, woman especially. And so for you, you should start with therapy, and you should start by going to 12-step meetings. Go to a Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous meeting. Find other women who have also been damaged in this way, and start to work the 12 steps. And I promise you, if you work those steps and you work that program, your life will start to change. You're also going to need a therapist who can help you go deeply into these hurt places, where you can go back and get that little girl and bring her into the present so that she can be a fully fledged woman. And so finding a trusted female therapist is going to be important for you. So take your time, go meet with a lot of different therapists until you find someone that feels right for you. And then also we have these quarterly love addiction weekend workshops that women really love, and it helps jumpstart your recovery. It's certainly not the answer to this problem, but it's another piece to the puzzle. If you live in LA, we have a women's intimacy group that meets every week. So group therapy, 12-step therapy workshops. Also, I'm doing a weekend workshop at the Esalen Institute and a week-long workshop in June if you're interested in working some of these issues out there. Again, certainly not all of them, but any place you step your toe into the healing process is going to crack everything open. And that's why you need a therapist, because you might think, well, I'm just going to go do this workshop, or I'm going to go do this female drumming circle, and all of a sudden you've got these feelings coming up. You need a trusted therapist that you can go and process this with on a weekly basis. And someone writes, how do you know when it's the right time to start dating? How do you know you have enough self-awareness and you won't get lost in the relationship? And so I know the person who's asking this question, and I would say the answer for you is now is the answer. And you know when you're feeling good enough and whole enough and you've done enough work. There's never a perfect time to be in a relationship. There's never a perfect time to buy a house, to have a baby, to, take a trip someplace. It's always inconvenient and difficult. We're never personally perfectly ready for any one thing in life. So it's about taking a leap of faith, jumping out there and seeing what happens. Because if you don't start to date, you're not going to have any data to work with. It's like, I have no idea what I'm like in relationship to other people. And what my conversations are like and how I feel afterwards. You can read books forever on that, but until you actually have the experience, you won't know what you need to do and what you need to do better. So I would encourage you to start dating today, to make a dating plan and to start dating. Someone says, I find this the hardest part of my life. I do not know how to get more self-awareness. I need a concrete plan with daily exercises. I worry so much that my husband is still lying to me and still sexually acting out. He claims to be sober, and if I could know myself, I would know whether he is. I ignored my gut for so long, I no longer could trust or know myself. And Amy, that is one of the horrible perils of living with sex addiction, is that, especially for women, our intuition just gets obliterated from sex addiction. The things that we think we know, we don't believe anymore. And this is the main thing that I think women, that partners of sex addicts need to heal, is a restoration of their intuition, of believing in themselves, of setting boundaries, of saying no. And so for you, you really need to find a forum where you can be very clear about what your boundaries are. There are online forums for that. There are great books about boundaries for partners of sex addicts. And so we also have a week-long intensive for partners of sex addicts, but you will not know until two things. One, you restore your sense of boundary and your capacity to say no and to trust your intuition. And also, it's not about what your husband is saying he's doing. It's about what his behaviors are. How does he show up? What is different? What is he telling you about his program? What is he telling you about his sobriety? How much is he including you in on his recovery? Because if his recovery is as secretive as his acting out, you really cannot trust him. Someone asked us if we have online counseling for SLAA. We do have some online offerings. We have coaching programs. We do have a female Ready to Heal program that's 12 weeks, and you can inquire about that by calling our intake line at 310-843-9902, and we can set you up for that. But our online coaching programs are time limited. They're there to help you get started for sex and love addiction, for partners, for sex addicts, but they are not the ultimate answer to your situation. You have to seek other resources too. So someone is asking another question. If I were involved with a sex addict who acted out with others, I discovered I was a sex addict addicted to this one partner with a trauma bond for 20 years. And now I hear you say I'm not healthier, that my partner. So, you know what? I'm having difficulty understanding that question. It's not clearly stated. So I'm going to have to come back to that because I don't understand that question. So someone says, how do you start dating? I'm not into online dating, but don't seem to meet anybody. When I'm out in the world, I'm an attractive, healthy young woman, but I've had a hard time to meet men organically. Well, I would say that, Anna, it's good to just start out with coffee dates. I understand that you don't like online dating, and a lot of people don't. So one thing is you start to tell everybody you know that you're interested in dating, and ask them if their own girlfriends or boyfriends know other males or females that you might find interesting. And go out for a coffee date. If you meet somebody in the workplace or you see somebody when you're out and about, it's good to be in community also, to be in meditation circles or in a church group or Sierra Club or a scuba club or whatever your interests are. It's really important. And that's why I think workshops are great, is when you go to a place where you're learning something, or athletic situations like you're part of a running club or a biking club, you're automatically meeting people that have the same interests that you have. And you strike up a conversation with them. You just start to chat about what your interests are. And if it feels good, it's okay, even as a female, to say to a male if you're heterosexual, or another female if you're lesbian, to say, you know what, I really enjoyed talking to you. Are you open for getting together again and going for another run? Or would you be interested in having coffee on Saturday? Or there's this really cool thing I found out about that I would love to share with you. Would you like to do that? So you have to be friendly, is what it comes down to. And you have to be willing to hear no, because you might chat somebody up who has a boyfriend or has a girlfriend and they're not really available for that. So don't take it as a rejection, just take it as more information or more data. Someone says, I keep hearing that we should avoid or kill our egos. Should we do that when cultivating self-awareness? Do we acknowledge our darkness and dance with our shadows, or work to avoid them? Well, that's a great question. So this notion of killing or annihilating any part of ourselves is an act of violence. And I think when these things are stated in spiritual circles, I really think about it as the difference between the left brain and the right brain. The left brain is very linear and it's functional, and we need it so that we know how to tie our shoes and operate a computer and follow directions and get from point A to point B. So we don't want to kill that part of ourselves off. But that is also the seat of our critical voice that says you can't do that, or that's not cool, or you shouldn't X, Y, and Z. And so we're really, when we're cultivating self-awareness, we are cultivating the right brain down into the body. We're cultivating sensuality. We're cultivating a gut feeling. We're listening to the wisdom of the body, which is always more in the knowing than the left brain. So for an example, you might see an ad for something like a beautiful workshop and thinking, oh, that would be so cool. I would love to do that. I've always wanted to learn to paint with watercolors or write poetry, or go to a massage class. I really want to do that. Like I'm lit up internally. I'm vital. I'm excited. And then the next thing that happens is the left brain swoops in and says, oh, you can't afford that. Or, you know what, I don't know, that's kind of over a holiday weekend, and I thought maybe I would go do whatever, I'm supposed to do my grocery shopping that weekend. Like all these lame excuses flood in that are shaming voices that say you really shouldn't do that. And that's what you want to be careful about. You really want to cultivate this sensual, intuitive gut feeling and watch the negative voices that try to crowd it out. So that's one aspect to the answer to your question. The other is acknowledging our darkness and dancing with our shadows is important, because otherwise we're engaging in what's known as spiritual bypass and dharma circles, or spiritual circles. And we've seen this with people that are highly religious, where it's all about turning it over to God or turning it over to something else, or I don't feel those feelings of anger anymore because I'm enlightened, which is a lie. Anger is a vital part of our brains. Unless you have you're cutting off parts of your brain, you're never going to not feel anger, and we need anger to mobilize ourselves. And so what we call our shadow, our dark side, is something we want to invite in and work with and notice. Notice what happens when you're having a really delightful time somewhere, and then when it's over, you want to gossip about the hostess. And it's like, why am I all of a sudden trashing that whole party where I had such a good time, but now I'm gossiping about that person? What did they bring up in me? So it's not about the hostess. It's about my own envy or my own greed or my own feeling of insecurity that I'm not as pretty or I don't have as much money. That's where the work is with the shadow. So it's not about annihilating it. It's not about acting like it's not happening. It's about inviting it in and saying, here's another aspect of myself, which is not an aspect I like particularly, but what's really going on with me? And that is a high level of cultivating self-awareness. So thank you for bringing that up. Someone asks if meditation is recommended for self-awareness, and I would say absolutely. Meditation really tunes us into cultivating a certain part of our brain that helps us feel more grounded, more present, less reactionary also. And someone says, for self-awareness has become easier when I remember to see myself as God sees me, as beautiful and beloved. Otherwise, I'm likely not seeing a very good self. And that's great, Amy. I appreciate that too. So yes, if we are all divine emanations of spirit, in Christian language, they talk about being made in the image and likeness of God. In other Eastern practices is that we are an emanation of the divine or the absolute. This is how God knows itself, by having a human form on the planet so it can taste and touch and feel and smell and sense. So we're sensory beings, we're spiritual beings having this human experience, and so we're constantly having to work with the polarities of both. We have to deal with our psychology and our abuses, our sexual abuses, our rapes, our neglect from our parents, and the way that's distorted us, and also cultivate a higher sense of self at the same time so that we're integrated. So it's not one or the other. There are many beautiful books written about the merging of psychology and spirituality. So it doesn't matter which tradition you point at, all of them are bringing you back to an integration of the self. And someone says, how does a general therapist differ from a sex and love addiction therapist? I'm seeing my therapist for almost a year, and we were wondering whether a specialized therapist would be good after my 90-day withdrawal. Well, yes, people that are specifically trained in sex and love addiction understand those particular components more specifically, and they can help guide you to resources in ways that a therapist who doesn't may not know about. So that doesn't mean you have to leave your current individual therapist. It may mean that you want to go have, 8 or 12 sessions with someone who specializes in sex and love addiction, who can help you get into recovery and get on the right path. All right, so continuing on here with this notion of that self-awareness, like everything, like love, like sex, like any form of growth, begins inside. It's an inside job. So we have to be mindful about this outside in approach that our consumer culture just pounds on us every day, that you will be happy if you have that car, or if you have that much money, or if you have that boyfriend, or that house, or that job, or those clothes, then you will be happy. And all of that is in service of us buying our way to enlightenment. And it doesn't happen that way. You can have no money. There are stories and stories of people that are, horribly poor or in prison, who wake up in prison through meditation practices, through a practice of self-awareness, and they recognize that even though they're behind bars, they're free in their souls. And that's what we're pointing to and where we want to get to. Someone writes, I'm in recovery from sex and love addiction and alcoholism, and my partner is also in a 12-step recovery, alcoholism and Overeaters Anonymous. I've maintained my abstinence throughout this relationship. This is my first healthy relationship in recovery. Well, congratulations to you. That's no easy feat. And I'm curious about how much to share with him about the behaviors I got into around my sex and love addiction. When I'm triggered to act out, do you recommend I bring him into my emotional experience in order to cultivate intimacy? Or do you recommend I keep my triggers out of the relationship and continue to work them through my sponsor program and sex addiction therapist? Wow, that's such a beautiful question. And it really, there's so many things I don't know about you and your partner and where you are. So it's challenging to answer this question. But I will say that if you've been in recovery for a long time and you want to talk about your sexuality specifically with your partner, then that is absolutely an act of building intimacy. But your partner has to be solid enough in his own recovery to be able to hear you without feeling threatened, without making it about himself. He's got to be willing to listen to you, to really understand and know you, as opposed to using it against you in a way that becomes judgmental or weaponizes it in some way. And that will depend on how evolved he is in his own process. So this may be something that the two of you attempt, in the presence of a skilled couples therapist also, where they help you with active listening and active talking. And that I think your own work would then be in asking yourself, what part of this do I really want him to know about me? Because I know for myself, when I was dating my husband, I wanted him to know about my sexual past and my sexual history, part of which was because I had shame about it. And I didn't want him discovering something about me. I didn't want to misrepresent myself. I didn't want to lie by omission that I was this great person that he thought I was when we were falling in love. And later find out that, oh, she actually has some chinks in her armor, or she's not as perfect as I thought she was. So I didn't want to misrepresent myself. That's why I felt the longing and the calling to tell him about my sexual past and history. So really start with that question: what do I want him to know, and why do I want him to know it? And then maybe the two of you talk about your talking and saying, there are things about you I want you to know about me. What's that going to be like for you? This is why I want you to know. And so that conversation can happen long before you actually, reveal the details. And the details may not be that important after you have the talk about just talking. Let's see. So a few people have written about being survivors about sexual abuse and childhood trauma, and that this proposition of coming out of that sort of self-loathing that goes with being sexually abused really, really requires a good therapist. And I think that's the place to start, because those areas are so tender. When we are sexually tampered with in any way, that is, I think, the foundation of our sense of self. I think our sexuality is at the core of who we are. It's in our gut, it's in our belly, it's in our first chakra. And that has to be healed with somebody through deep work. Working with a trauma therapist specifically is where you should start, because the workshops will rattle all of this to the surface, but then you need a place to go and process it, is what I was saying. You can't think that you're going to go to group therapy or to weekend workshops or strictly to a 12-step program and heal your sexual abuse. You will not. All of those things, it's like baking a cake. Going to therapy is the making of the batter and the baking of the cake, but 12-step is the frosting, which is essential for gluing it all together and holding it together, and the beauty that comes in making the cake, just as workshops are sort of like the cherry on top of the cake or the sprinkles on the cake. You don't have a complete cake without all of those, but without that foundational trauma work, you won't get very far. Your cake will collapse. And then someone says, after being with a sex addict for 20 years and confirming he's an addict 3 months ago, and then I find out I'm a sex and love addict, and have trauma bonded with him. When women who are not addicts are okay to stay with their sex addict partners if they're interested in particularly working things out. If both parties are not any healthier than the others, what makes these two examples different? I'm not sure. Again, there are so many pieces to this that aren't clear. I don't think you can compare yourself to, what if somebody has a different configuration of relationship than I do? The question is, who are you? What kind of relationship are you in? And what kind of relational healing do you need to do? And what are the supports and structures that you need for yourself? So I want to continue on here, because we're going to have to wrap this up shortly. But remembering that we are holding a paradox here where we are having to accept ourselves and improve ourselves at the same time. And that's another paradox that exists in life, is that how do I work on myself and have compassion because I want to heal myself, and also hold out that I'm okay as I am today. Um, so this thing about not comparing ourselves to other people, and allowing ourselves to reach out for support when we're triggered, finding a community of concern, will not disappear our problems ever, but it will expand our capacity to manage our problems so that we are different, so that we show up differently, that we find solutions based on quality, that we're not reactive, that we become more loving of ourselves so we become more loving of other people. So ask yourself, just on the heels of this webinar, because even this conversation can stir up a lot in all of you, is that how has your self-awareness evolved to this point in your life? And where do you need to go from here? What is the next stage of your personal growth and development? And take time to really let your self-awareness help you to visualize and grow where you need to go next. Is it in the area of dating, as some people wrote? Is it in the area of, marriage counseling, or consciously divorcing the person that you're with? Because your husband or your wife may or may not want to be sexual again. And at some point you have to ask yourself, why am I in this relationship? If couples counseling's not working, or if this person isn't doing the work they're doing, why am I staying stuck in my pattern? And is it more painful to stay in this pattern or to change the pattern? Because both of the things are going to create pain. One is the pain of staying stuck, and the other is the pain of blasting out into a new world and changing who you are and changing your life. And so finally, I'm going to leave you with this note, because we do have to stop here, to share your expanding inner world with your lover in the same way that self-awareness finds you. So as self-awareness emerges in you, as you have these aha moments, even if it's your shadow side, share them with great, vulnerability and curiosity with your partner. And part of what I think all of you are asking about, or what you want to know, here is, what do I do to cultivate my own self-awareness? And ultimately, it begins with you. It begins with whatever modalities that you're trying, and that you don't give up on yourself, and that you don't become a victim and blame therapy or meetings or books or whatever because they're not good enough. You have to look at where your stuckness is and where you are holding yourself back. No one else holds us back. We hold ourselves back. So on that note, I hope you have a beautiful rest of the day today, and that you're welcoming spring in an open-hearted, self-aware way. And I look forward to talking to you all again in May. So take good care and have fun with this notion of self-awareness. See if you can practice it for the rest of the day at the very least. And thank you all.